Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I just wanted to let you know that the story you're about to hear is from my book, DSE Archives, Volume 1, available now on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. Just click the link in the description and order your copy today. Thank you for your continued love and support. Now, on to the story.
My name is Matthew Hodges, and my time on this earth is running out, so I need to get this out quick, because the world needs to know what really happened on April 20th, 2020. The day began just like any other. I got up at 5:30 a.m., made a cup of coffee, turned on the news, and made a bowl of cereal. Once I finished, I got in the shower, brushed my teeth, and got dressed. I turned off the television and walked out the door. I hopped into my car and made my way to work. About 15 minutes later, I arrived at my job and observed parents dropping their kids off. "Good morning, Mr. Hodges," said several students. "Hello," I responded. I approached the counseling office. Carla, the school secretary, greeted me as I walked in. "Good morning, Matt." "Good morning, Carla," I replied as I passed the front desk. I entered my office, sat in my chair, and settled in. That's when Carla walked into my office. "There's a student that needs to speak with you," she said, gently knocking on the wall to get my attention. It's him again. I already knew who the student was. "Mr. Wilkins, come on in," I uttered. The scraggly 15-year-old boy staggered into my office. He wore a black trench coat, blue jeans, and Doc Marten boots. He had black hair with bangs that drooped over the right side of his face. His name was Cody Wilkins. He was a loner, always kept to himself, had no friends, and was picked on daily. I tried to get through to him by being someone he could vent to. Looking back, I think I was the only friend he had. "Cody, how have you been?" I asked. He slowly raised his head. I'm okay," he replied, in a timid tone. "So tell me, what's new?" Cody shifted in his chair. "Oh, the same old same." There was a brief silence as he brushed his hair aside. "How's that art class going? I spoke with your teacher, and she told me she was very impressed with your art." Cody chuckled a nervous chuckle. "Oh, it's nothing. I just paint whatever's on my mind. Nothing special," Cody replied as he hung his head down. He shuffled again in his seat, this time hunching over. "How are your other classes going?" Just the same old same," he replied. Clearly there was something Cody wasn't telling me. "Any issues with anyone in particular?" Cody shot a look at me, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. Well, I was wondering if I could drop PE," Cody asked in a hesitant tone. "Cody, we've been through this. You're a sophomore. You must be a junior in order to not take PE." Cody sat straight up and hung his head down again. "What happened? It's okay, you can tell me," I reassured him. Cody brushed his hair back. "Well, yesterday in PE, we were all in the gym, and we were told to play basketball. It was time to pick teams, and I was the last one picked, as usual. After the teams were chosen, we began to play. Kyle had the ball, and I was guarding him. He went up to shoot, and I managed to block his shot, and we both fell to the ground. After the game, we all went back to the lockers." Cody fell silent. "What happened in the locker room?" I asked, reassuring Cody it was okay to tell me. "Well, I was changing out of my PE clothes at my locker when Kyle snuck up behind me and slammed me against the locker. Other students crowded around us. Kyle was smirking and slammed me again. This time, I was slammed head first. I tried to get away, but two other guys grabbed me, and they held me as Kyle punched me in the face. I paused for a moment, taking in everything Cody told me. That's when I noticed the black eye on his face. "Did you tell Mr. Fletcher what happened?" Cody shook his head. I didn't see the point. I told Mr. Fletcher the first time it happened. He just told me to suck it up. "Well, I'm going to notify Principal Heller, and I'm going to request a meeting with Mr. Fletcher and Kyle." "All right, go to class, Cody, and try to have a good day." Cody nodded his head and walked out of my office. I was trying to keep myself from displaying the anger I felt after what Cody had told me. I picked up the phone on my desk and called Principal Heller. "Principal Heller," he said in a gruff voice. "Principal Heller, how are you doing?" I asked. "Oh, Hodges, I'm well. What can I do for you?" "I would like to schedule a meeting with you. It's regarding Cody Wilkins." There was a slight pause, and what followed was a drawn-out sigh. "That kid again?" Heller said, sounding annoyed. "Yes, that kid." "Are you available to talk after school today?" I asked sternly. "Fine," Heller said in a reluctant tone. I could tell he slammed the phone on the receiver when he hung up. I looked at the clock and realized it was lunchtime. Normally, I would patrol the campus overseeing the students, but instead, I decided to eat in the faculty lounge. I was the only one in the lounge, so I took out my phone and earbuds. I scrolled through some podcasts and stopped at one that I had not heard before. The title was pretty generic to me. That's why it caught my attention. It was called The Jasper Show, hosted by Jasper Anderson. He had a rugged yet flamboyant Southern accent. He spoke with a verbose tenacity that was loud and chaotic, which made the subject all too entertaining. "These here mass shootings were not done by a random lone gunman. They were committed by agents of the deep state. Also, they can justify taking away your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms." His rhetoric was unbelievable and hilarious. The fact that people listened to this guy and believed him was astounding. It was difficult for me to hold back my laughter the more I listened. My amusement was cut short, however, when the bell rang, signaling lunch's end. I packed up my things and made my way toward the exit. That's when I abruptly bumped into Crystal. She was the head librarian. "Oh, I'm sorry," I exclaimed. "Oh, no worries, it's fine," replied Crystal, as she and I picked up her books, and I escorted her to a table and pulled out a chair for her. "Well, how's your day going so far?" I asked. She looked at me while adjusting her glasses. "Oh, same old same. Books remain on the shelves. Students only use the library to charge their phones," she chuckled. "Crystal and I had been friends since high school. We even attended Taston High together, the same school that employed us." "How the hell did we end up back in this place?" I asked, laughing. I asked myself that question all the time. After graduation, I vowed to never return to this godforsaken place. Now here I am, Crystal said, letting out a sigh. "Yeah, tell me about it. I couldn't wait to get out of this place either. Just so I wouldn't have to see Heller again." "Now he's my boss," I said, shaking my head. "Oh, God. First he's our principal, now our boss. Life really sucks." "Speaking of Heller, I have a meeting with him today," I replied. "Oh, yeah? About what?" "Cody Wilkins," I said, slouching in my chair. "Him again, huh? What happened this time?" "The usual. Laughed at, beat up, and for no reason. Yet the perpetrators were never held accountable." There was a slight pause and the bell rang again. Crystal and I said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. I decided to go ahead and make my way to Heller's office anyway, hoping maybe I could catch him this time around. On my way there, I passed a bench, and sitting on it was Cody. He was holding something in his hands. I squinted and realized it was a magazine. On the front cover was the photo of a pistol, and Cody was entranced by it. He fixed his gaze on the photo, studying every line and shape. That's when an eerie feeling crept upon my nerves, and I knew speaking to Heller was more imperative. So I ran to Heller's office and knocked on the door. The door flung open, and stood a man, about 5'3", bald with thick gray hair wrapped around his head. He wore large, transparent glasses on his face that looked awkward compared to his scrawny body. Matt, come on in. I rushed in and sat in a chair facing his desk. Let me guess, you want to discuss this Cody Wilkins? Heller said, leaning back in his chair. Yes. As you know, Cody was terrorized the moment he stepped foot on this campus. He came to my office this morning, and he told me Kyle Harris assaulted him again in PE yesterday. Heller leaned forward slowly, twiddling his thumbs for a couple of seconds. And what would you like me to do? He asked, polishing his glasses with a tissue. Was that a serious question? I expect you to do something about it. Expel him, give him detention, something. What about the school's zero tolerance for bullying? Or does that only apply to certain students? Oh, come on, Hodges. Cody's just one of 2,500 students that attend this school. He isn't the only one being bullied or dealing with issues, said Heller, leaning back in his chair again. You've known what Cody has been dealing with. I know he's brought his issues to your attention in the past. And how many more students like Cody have to suffer? I exclaimed. Heller sighed and folded his arms. Listen, you have one problem, and I have a million of them. I have to deal with students, faculty, parents, school board, district administrators, and other nonsense. So please, give me a break. I can't believe this. Heller stared at me sternly. He stood up, and I stood up at the same time he did. You know, Heller, when I was a student here, I used to think you were a douchebag. You just proved me right. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. I walked down a hallway, and on my way to my office, I abruptly bumped into two female students. Oh, excuse me, I said. They looked at me with an expression of terror. They fled in the opposite direction. Then a boy sprinted past me. Hey, where are you going? He turned and shot me a look, then uttered in a shaking voice, Run! Then he sprinted away. I tried to wrap my mind around what happened when I heard hundreds of frantic steps and screams, followed by repetitive popping noises that sounded like firecrackers, when a stampede of students rushed toward me. Hey, what's going on? I yelled. They knocked me to the ground, and all I could do was curl up and pray I wouldn't get trampled. After the stampede cleared, I got up, confused, looking around, still not knowing what happened. Then I heard heavy thuds. It sounded like someone was marching. The steps were getting closer and heavier, until they stopped right around the corner in front of me. They slowly crept around the wall like a predator stalking its prey. I came face to face with a man wearing a black trench coat and black Doc Marten boots. He was tall, muscular stature. His face was covered by a black ski mask and dark green camouflage pants draped over his legs. His eyes were void, with no visible pupils and absence of any remorse. In his hands was an AK-47 equipped with a 100-round drum magazine. The shooter's trench coat was open, and I noticed he had on a t-shirt, and in red letters were the words, Apex Predator. The sinister gunman turned to me, and aimed his gun at my face. I instantly snapped out of my frozen state and sprinted as fast as my legs could carry me. I could feel the rapid heat of the bullets flying past me. I tripped and fell to the ground and crawled into a nearby classroom. And I peered through the crack of the door, and I noticed the shooter walking at a steady pace as more students ran frantically. That's when I dashed out of the classroom and ran to the exit when I heard gunfire behind me. I dove behind a wall and then peered out, trying to locate the shooter. Instead, I saw students falling to the ground. Blood flowed from their bodies as the smoke from their wounds ascended into the air. The shooter waved the AK in a sweeping motion, spraying bullets and mowing down any student in his path. Their blood-curdling cries for mercy pierced the air with bellowing fulmination. Unexpectedly, I noticed Heller behind the shooter. He was bent down, trying to sneak past him. It looked like he was headed toward the parking lot. He stopped for a second, turned his head, and our eyes locked. Panic was plastered on his face as he slowly got on his hands and knees and crawled toward the parking lot again. He moved with apprehensive haste while trying to remain undetectable by the shooter. He was about halfway there when the shooter noticed him and grabbed him by the ankle. Heller kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The shooter dragged him to a spot where I could clearly witness what was about to happen. The shooter looked directly at me and pinned Heller down with his boot and pointed the barrel of his gun at Heller's face. "Oh God, please don't!" Heller screamed, begging like a dog. The shooter eased the weapon and placed it on his shoulder and removed his boot from Heller's chest. "Oh, thank God! Oh, thank God!" Heller exclaimed. He was about to crawl away when the shooter stepped on his leg. I could hear the ankle snap. Heller screamed in agony. The shooter raised his boot and pressed it on Heller's head. And then he pressed down. Heller's cries for mercy engulfed the air as his eyes bulged out of their sockets as his skull slowly cracked. Heller's screams became gargled, and blood poured from his nose, mouth, and ears. His jaw was gaping open, and he was trying to scream. This time, there was no sound. All that was left was a pile of flesh and crushed bone. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone else, just behind the shooter, were the student restrooms. I focused my gaze on the direction of the restrooms and noticed someone peeking out from the boys' bathroom. I squinted and immediately recognized the gray hair peek out from the corner. It was Fletcher, the PE teacher. With his finger, he looked right at me and gestured for me to keep quiet as he tiptoed toward the front parking lot. The shooter must have noticed I was looking at someone behind him because he swiftly turned around and saw Fletcher. He pointed his AK right at him. Fletcher was frozen stiff, held his hands up. His mouth quivered as he wept and begged for his life. Please, 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 God, not like this. Please spare me." The shooter ignored Fletcher's cries for mercy as he pulled the trigger, unleashing a barrage of bullets into his body. For a split second, my mind flashed back to my orientation when I was first hired. There was a segment on what to do if an active shooter was on campus. The instructor taught us the safety of the students comes first, and we conducted an exercise on how to get students to safety. All that training immediately escaped my mind. I only cared about getting the hell out of that school. I turned to my right and noticed the library just ahead of me, and I made my way toward the entrance, my hand quivering as I placed it on the doorknob and turned it frantically. The door was locked shut. Panic swept over me as I looked around for the shooter when the door swung open by Crystal. "Come in, quick!" she yelled, yanking me into the library. I could hear sobs coming from underneath the desks. I peered down and I saw students hiding underneath, their expressions engulfed by terror. Crystal pulled me to the ground, then led me to the front desk where we crunched down. There was a phone next to us that hung off the hook. "Hello, ma'am? Ma'am? You still there?" the voice said on the other line. Yes, I'm here," Crystal replied in a frantic whisper. "Where are you now?" "I'm hiding under a desk in the library. There are at least 20 students here, too," Crystal whispered, her voice trembling. I realized Crystal was speaking to a 911 operator. "Where is the shooter?" asked the operator. "I don't know. I think he's..." The sound of the doorknob twisting violently silenced Crystal mid-sentence. The students under the desk squealed as the knob twisted viciously. Silence overcame the library. Quickly and suddenly, it was eerie, and I could hear every whimper coming from underneath the desks. I could hear tables and chairs shaking from the fear of those students who sought sanctuary beneath them. "Quiet!" Crystal snapped at the students, still trying to whisper. "Where the hell is he?" she whispered in my ear. "I don't know," I whispered back. I crawled over to the door, and I slowly rose on my knees to peer out of the glass window on the center of the door. I looked right, then left, but I couldn't see anything. That was until I looked to my right again, and inches from my face was the barrel of a gun. The only thing that separated my brain from a bullet was the thin glass within the window. I immediately ducked to the ground just a millisecond before a blast shattered the glass. I dove back under the desk, and the library erupted with screams as the shooter kicked down the door. Crystal was about to scream, but I clamped her mouth with my hand. My body shook rigorously as I saw the shooter's boot inches from me. I could hear him rummaging on the tabletop directly above me. I heard what sounded like metal slamming on top of the desk. Suddenly, the speakers throughout the school crackled, and static filled the air. Then I heard it. The song. Yes, a song. It was playing over the sound system. The beat picked up, and the rhythm gained momentum. And I instantly recognized the song. It was Pumped Up Kicks. The shooter dropped the AK right next to me, and then I heard the pump of a 12 gauge. I could see the shooter stomping his way toward the students. He flipped one desk over, and facing him on her knees was Kelsey Wicks. She looked up at the shooter, tears running down her face, horror in her eyes. "Please don't," she uttered. The shooter placed the barrel to her face and pulled the trigger. In a flash, her headless body fell on its back, and the shooter prowled slowly to the next desk and flipped it over, exposing Kyle Harris. He looked up at the shooter as the barrel was pressed against his abdomen. "Please don't kill me," begged Kyle. The shooter pulled the trigger. I could only cower in fear as the shooter moved on to the next desk. He flipped the table over, revealing Elizabeth Tenzin, crouched on her knees. She was a skinny bookworm in the library and was a genuine scholar, passionate about any subject. This school year was her senior year, and she was excited to attend Loxton University in the fall, which was her lifelong dream. Elizabeth was praying to God when the shooter crouched down to her. "God, please, God." Elizabeth looked right at me. Her eyes conveyed she knew her fate was sealed. "God, please be with me," she calmly stated. The shooter slowly raised the barrel of the shotgun under Elizabeth's chin and pulled the trigger. The maniac stood up, wiping blood and pieces of flesh from his mask. I tried to keep Crystal quiet as her body shook uncontrollably. To prevent the shooter from discovering a location, I did everything I could to keep her quiet by clamping my hand over her mouth. That's when I heard a whisper behind me. Psst, psst, psst. I turned around. It was Cody. Cody, what are you doing here? I whispered. I came here to type a paper when this wacko came in and started shooting. I dove behind a bookshelf and played dead. Cody whispered back. We can sneak out. We just have to crawl and stay quiet, said Cody. I looked at Crystal. Her apprehension was visible by her uncontrolled shivering. Crystal, this is our only shot, I insisted. She nodded her head, and the three of us crawled toward the door, on our bellies as silently as possible. Cody made it to the door first and gently raised his hand to the doorknob. I looked behind me and noticed the shooter was prowling the opposite direction where we were. Cody twisted the knob while trying with all his might not to make a sound. I watched his fingers wrap around the knob and slowly twist it. It felt like time had come to a standstill. The sound of a click broke my trance as Cody gently opened the door, and Crystal and I crawled toward the exit. I waved Cody to go first as I held the door open, and he and Crystal made their way through. Once they were clear, I made my attempt to escape. My arm quivered uncontrollably, steadily keeping the door open, while trying to step outside as quietly as possible. I steadily placed my foot down, and then the door was about a quarter open. Its hinges connecting the door to the wall caused the door to sway gently. The door inched closer to being sealed, and my foot finally touched the ground. I frantically waved Cody and Crystal to run as we sprinted toward the exit gate at the back of the campus. We were about halfway to the exit when I heard heavy, rapid footsteps behind me. I took a quick glimpse, and there he was, the shooter, his shotgun aimed right at me. This time, pumped-up kicks was blaring throughout the entire speaker system in the school. I suddenly stumbled and fell to the ground and sprung back up as fast as I could. I placed my hands on my shirt and realized it was wet. I looked at my hands. They were covered in blood. I looked down, and it was the body of a girl lying in a pool of blood, with her lifeless face in a state of terror. I scoped my surroundings, and it felt like time had yet again slowed down. There seemed to be countless bodies of students lying motionless in their own blood. Some of them had facial expressions that detailed the horror they endured, not knowing that this day was the last day of their precious young lives. However, there was no time to grieve, as the shooter was in pursuit, so I continued to run along with Cody and Crystal. There were no police in sight, and so I thought no help would arrive. The sound of a shotgun blast caused me to dive behind a brick wall. Cody dove underneath a bench while Crystal hid behind a vending machine. I slowly peered over and saw the shooter with his shotgun in hand, and he made his way towards Crystal's direction as she attempted to speak, but I waved at her, trying to get her to hide. She noticed me waving at her and remained hidden, and she got the message and ducked behind the machine. As the shooter crept toward the vending machine, I could see Crystal trembling, clasping her hand over her mouth to prevent herself from screaming. My eyes were wide, observing with intensity as the shooter inched closer, the shotgun ready and aimed. Cody shot a look at me, and I gestured for him to stay put as I slowly crept behind the shooter. By this time, he was standing directly in front of the vending machine, his head nodding up and down. This was my chance, and I sprinted towards him. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and he flung his body simultaneously, firing rounds from his shotgun. I held on with all my might, but he slammed me against the vending machine. Crystal screamed as the shotgun rang out. The shooter grabbed me by the neck and slammed me on the ground. He raised his massive boot, then plunged it towards my face. I rolled over just in time as the impact left a crack in the concrete. The shooter pointed his shotgun at me, the barrel inches from my face, and he was about to squeeze the trigger when Cody jumped on his back, causing the shooter to fire in the air. Cody wrestled with the shooter, and I tackled him by going for his legs. The guy felt like he weighed a ton, as his legs were dense as steel. He grabbed Cody. He lifted both of us in the air and then slammed us to the ground. The shooter then focused his attention on Cody, lifting him up again by the neck. I was trying to figure out how to help him when I heard the pump of a shotgun. I looked to my right and saw Crystal holding the weapon and pointing it right at the shooter. "Hey!" Crystal screamed. "Put him down!" she cried out. "Just shoot him!" I yelled. The shooter turned to face Crystal. His blank eyes were all that was visible underneath his mask. Cody's face was turning blue, as his throat was being crushed. He dropped Cody, and like a predator, the shooter stalked his way toward Crystal. She held the gun directly at the shooter as her hands trembled. "Shoot him, Crystal! Do it now!" I yelled. With her trembling hand, Crystal wrapped her finger around the trigger and squeezed. The shooter was hit directly in the chest by the deafening blast from the shotgun. The recoil made Crystal stumble backward, her grip loosened, and the shotgun fell to the ground. Oddly enough, there were no signs of pain or anguish that appeared on the shooter's face when he looked down at where he had been shot. Instead, he just picked up the shotgun, which had landed right in front of him, and then pointed it at Crystal's face. My heart raced, my blood rushed, and my nerves were rabid, as I felt powerless to stop him. But I had to try something, so I decided the only way was to rush this lunatic and tackle him before he could pull the trigger. I charged full speed toward the shooter, sprinting as hard as possible. My hands were outstretched as I attempted to leap upon the shooter's back. Then I felt a sudden force, which caused me to stop dead in my tracks. The shooter was thrusted into a concrete bench that shattered on impact. I looked to my left, and there, standing tranquil, was a man. He had on a blue button-down shirt, a black leather jacket, and wore dark blue jeans with black boots. On his waist was a black leather belt with a police badge that said TCPD, which stood for Tassin City Police Department. "Oh, thank God," I yelled out. The guy just glared at me, and then he focused his attention back on the shooter, who by this time was standing up, holding the statue of the school mascot. His strength astonished me, considering the statue weighed at least 5 tons, and it was even bolted down with titanium-reinforced bolts. Yet, he could tear it from the concrete ground like it was nothing. The shooter lifted the statue over his head and threw it at this cop. With a right hook, the cop shattered the statue to bits. Pieces of it dispersed in multiple directions. That's when the shooter charged toward him. And the cop stood his ground, quiet and confident. The shooter leaped to tackle the cop, but he missed as the officer stepped out of the way. He turned around, cocking his head side to side, and lunged at the officer again. This time, the cop flipped over him and landed a kick to the shooter's back, tossing him into a metal rail and snapping it in half. The shooter stood up and took off his trench coat, revealing the wound where Crystal had shot him. There was no blood. Not a single drop. No torn flesh. No exposed bone. Instead, the center of his chest was a metal plate. In the center of the wound, I rubbed my eyes to make sure what I was gazing upon was real. In a quick burst of speed, the shooter rushed to the vending machine and lifted it over his head. He threw it at the cop, who caught it and threw it back at the shooter, who punched it, causing the machine to burst, spewing carbonated liquid in all directions as soda cans littered the ground. The combatants charged toward each other and collided like rampaging bulls. Their collision was so great the ground shook beneath their feet. They traded blows like heavyweight boxers at lightning speed, and the cop knocked the shooter on his back with a vicious uppercut. He then removed something from his jacket. For a split second, I thought it was a baton. He rushed the shooter and leaped while doing a 360-degree turn with the baton in his hand and landed firmly on his feet. My eyes focused, and then I noticed it. Protruding from the handle was a blade that was at least 2 feet long. This cop, or whoever he was, used it on the shooter. I thought he missed him because there was no blood on the blade. I looked back at the shooter, who slowly turned to face his assailant. The cop pressed something on the handle, and the blade retracted. He tilted his head side to side, as if expecting something to happen. The shooter took one step forward, and suddenly his body twitched as he dropped to his knees. What happened next made me rethink my entire reality. The shooter's head slid off his shoulders. It bounced on the ground like a basketball and stumbled toward the cop. The cop pressed his foot on the head, forcing it to come to a complete halt. I looked over at the headless body, but there was no blood. Instead, sparks spewed from the wound like a sparkler, along with electrical wires. Was I witnessing something out of a sci-fi film? Was this shooter a robot? The cop picked up the shooter's head and removed the mask. It was the head of a young man. With his middle and pointer fingers, the cop plunged his fingers into the back of the head and began peeling the flesh as if he was peeling an orange. With each peel, the skull was revealed bit by bit, and the cop continued to peel off the flesh, gently removing the eyes, nose, ears, and lips, until the flesh was completely peeled off and revealed a metal skull. He took his fingers and twisted something on the back of it. There was a pop sound, and his hands looked like some sort of microchip. He then removed his sunglasses as he intently analyzed the chip. I noticed he had on an earpiece, and he pressed it, after which I heard his voice for the first time. "The threat has been neutralized. The item is secured." There was a slight pause, then he spoke again. "There are currently 3 survivors in my presence. How do you want me to proceed?" I didn't know who he was speaking to, but chills went up my spine as he stared at me with predatory intensity. His eyes. There was definitely something non-human about them. They were bright yet intense and shined like a golden light. Cody and Crystal looked at me with apprehensive eyes. All 3 of us had the urge to flee, but were too petrified to move an inch. "Copy that," he said as he placed the chip into a small Ziploc bag. He gripped the skull and hoisted the headless body on his shoulder. This cop, it was obvious that he was no member of law enforcement, turned around without uttering a word and made his way to the exit. I watched him walk as he faded off into the distance. As soon as he left, I heard a loud voice that screeched, "Get on the ground now! Now! Put your hands behind your head!" I felt someone tackle me from behind and pin me to the ground and force my hands to the back of my head. I was surrounded by at least 24 SWAT from the Tassin Police Department. They placed Cody, Crystal, and me in cuffs and then escorted us out of the school and placed each of us in separate windowless vans. Upon entering the van, one officer, disguised under a ski mask, wrapped a blindfold around my head that covered my eyes. Panic surged through me as I felt the vehicle taking off, so I twisted my body frantically in a futile attempt to escape, but they forced me back down. I had no idea what was going on. All I could do was pray that I could make it home in one piece. The van came to a sudden stop, and I heard the door of the van swing open. I was thrust out of the van, then dragged off. To this day, I don't know where they took me. All I remember is the sound of a heavy door opening. They shoved me inside, in what I assumed was a building. I didn't know if it was from the air or the fear, but I was shivering uncontrollably. I felt the hands of two men grip me by my arms and escort me down what seemed like a corridor. I came to an abrupt halt. I heard a door open, and I was shoved inside, then forced into a chair. I could hear someone across from me breathing. After an awkward pause, they addressed me in a soft tone. "Matthew Hodges, you've had a rough day. Sorry about that." It was a woman's voice. It sounded sincere, soft, pleasant, yet intimidating. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Who I am is none of your concern. The only thing you should be concerned about is leaving here alive." I tightened up in my chair, and my body quivered. "You're going to need to sign this document. It states you'll keep your mouth shut." I heard her slide something toward me. I flinched as I felt someone approach me from behind. They uncuffed me, then placed a pen in my hand. "Sign," the person said sternly. "Who the hell are you people?" I yelled. "Like I said, that's none of your concern," she replied. "Bullshit! Did you people send that shooter? Huh? Well, did you?" Silence. Nothing but brief silence. "Sign the form." "I won't tell you again. And if I refuse?" I said, panting. "Oh, trust me, you will." I heard a click, and something pressed against the back of my head. I knew exactly what it was. I reluctantly gave in to this woman's demands and scribbled my name on the form to the best of my ability. "Good enough. Take him," she demanded. They pulled me from the chair and escorted me through the cold facility until I felt the sun's warmth on my back. They thrusted me into a vehicle, and I didn't know where they were taking me. All I remember was the drive felt like hours. The vehicle came to an abrupt halt, the door flung open, and someone yanked me from the van and tossed me face first on the cold concrete. Still shaken, I slowly stood up and removed the blindfold. I caught a glimpse of the van speeding off in the distance. Disoriented, I looked around, trying to gain a sense of where I was. I realized I was in front of my house. Upon this realization, I checked my pockets and found my keys, and I sprinted to the front door. My hands trembled as I placed the key in the door, and after what felt like a marathon, I finally opened the door. I rushed upstairs to my bedroom and grabbed my shotgun from under my bed. I loaded it and then proceeded to the living room. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I boarded up every window, locked every door, and sat on the couch and drank every bit of coffee and gripped my shotgun until the sun came up. The next morning, I packed up everything I could carry. Unfortunately, my car was still at the school, so I called a taxi to take me to the airport. I had to get as far away from this place as quickly as possible. Once the taxi arrived, I hopped in and was off to Tassin International Airport. After I made it through security, I remember waiting to board the plane. My mind reminisced about everything that had happened to me, wondering if this was all real. I was snapped out of my daydream when the television directly above me had a segment that caught my attention. "Good morning. You're watching TNN with Dennis Scheiber. Police are calling this the worst school shooting in history. which occurred yesterday at Tassin High School. Joining me now with more details is independent journalist Alexa Calloway. The young female reporter recounted what happened. I recognized her. I often watched her podcast. According to police, a lone gunman with a 12-gauge and an AK-47 opened fire on students and staff at around 12 p.m. They had been identified, the shooter, as 17-year-old Christopher Hutchins. Investigators say he was a loner who didn't socialize with anyone. However, he maintained a diary, and police discovered entries where Hutchins planned the shooting for an entire year. There was a photo of the shooter posted on the screen. The image was of a young man. He had blonde hair with light blue eyes and with a blank stare. I didn't recognize him at all. In fact, I don't ever recall encountering a student named Christopher Hutchins. I immediately thought back to the Jasper show and how he said these school shootings were all fabricated, how I brushed it off as nonsense. Now, I realize he may have been right about this one. I later found out Cody suffered from a mental breakdown and became addicted to drugs. He was eventually committed to a treatment facility. 1 week after his release, Cody died on the streets of downtown Tassin. The official report ruled his death as suicide after he leapt from a 10-story building. However, someone leaked the footage of the day he died. On it, Cody's on top of a building, but he's running. Then he stops at the edge of the building. Cody turned around with his hands raised as if surrendering. Then the clip ends. As for Crystal, I kept in contact with her for about 6 months after the shooting, but one day I stopped hearing from her. I later found out Crystal was killed in a car accident after being T-boned by a large semi. Even more strange was the day before her death, Crystal told the world the truth about the shooting and shared everything she witnessed on a podcast, The Jasper Show. Crystal divulged what happened on that horrifying day, how the shooter was a machine and the supposed cop that killed the shooter. The day after her death, the interview in Jasper's podcast were removed from the internet. And no matter how much you scour the internet, you'll never find either of them. This brings me to present day. Over the past 3 years, I've been on the run. I no longer have a permanent address, as I have kept moving from place to place, laying my head wherever I can. I've little time left. Everywhere I go, I know he is there. Even now, as I record this entry, I know he is watching me as I look out the window of this rundown motel. So whoever finds this recording, just know by the time you do, I will already be dead. And let me stress, it was not by suicide. I beg you, please get this out and share it with as many people as possible. The world needs to know the truth. Goodbye.
That was Last Day of School from DSE Archives, Volume 1. Available now on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. Just click the link in the description and order your copy today. If you haven't already, be sure to click the subscribe button so you can be notified when new content is posted. I'm Travis J., and thank you for your continued love and support. I'm out. Peace.